Hello learners, welcome back to the course on learning and development in organization. Today we move to an interesting topic where we'll be diagnosing the learning and developing needs. So we have talked extensively about learning and development in the past few classes, but today we'll look into the learning and development L&D needs. How will we diagnose that there is a shortcoming in the organization with respect to learning and development? What are the typical needs that are there? What are the ways in which we identify them, and what are the tools and techniques with which we can actually identify and mitigate them? I am Dr. Cyril Issac. I am an assistant professor at the School of Business, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Now, when you look into the training need or learning need analysis, typically you will have to come across the same theme which lies or which goes across most of the lectures, and I've also introduced this in the first video. An organization's ability to learn and translate that learning into action rapidly is the ultimate competitive advantage. So when you are focused on learning and development, when you are an organization typically that is giving stress to learning and development, that is the cornerstone for the success of that particular organization. You look into this learning and development, you see that we have to, something I generally say to my students, if we cannot measure something, it is very hard to improve that thing. So if we need to improve something, we need to have a quantifiable measure. And this is what we try to establish in this particular session. Let's understand the learning and development needs in detail. Now, when you look into learning and development, we have seen what learning and development is, but specific to L&D needs, they represent the gap between an individual's current knowledge, skills and abilities and the level required for effective job performance or organization goals. Many a time we have certain, I call it TDRs, tasks, duties and responsibilities to be performed in an organization. Our TDRs, are they matching with the KSAs what we are having, the knowledge, skills and abilities, and the task, duties and responsibilities the organization is having or giving to us, are they in a sync? What is the gap? This is typically the learning and development need. Let's understand particularly with respect to the courses. Now, these gaps emerge due to technological advancements, evolving roles, organizational changes, or I will also say basically the market shifts specifically. So when we are looking into the learning and development needs specifically, you will see that identifying and analyzing these needs is a foundational step in designing effective training programs and teaching activities and ensuring that employees are equipped to meet both current and future challenges respectively. So if you ask me, the process of diagnosing L&D needs involves systematically analyzing these knowledge, skills and abilities and to determine whether deficiencies exist and what interventions are necessary to bridge the gap. So this ensures that training initiatives are not only reactive but also proactive in addressing the emerging needs. Now let's look into typically the importance of needs assessment. You look into needs assessment, a thorough needs assessment is the cornerstone of any successful learning and development strategy. So for that, we have a targeted intervention. You call a targeted intervention because it is required without a clear understanding of what needs improvement. Training programs risk being generic and ineffective. So needs assessment ensures that interventions are tailored to address specific gaps, making them impactful and critically relevant. So this is one of the most important thing when we talk about the target intervention. I would suggest you to go and read Goldstein and Ford 2002. This particular study details on the impact and the necessity of target intervention. You look into resource optimization on the other hand, it is all about the fact that training programs require time. They require money, they require effort. So, conducting a needs assessment helps organizations avoid wasting resources on unnecessary or irrelevant training, ensuring that the investments that are directed, if you ask me, towards the areas with the highest ROI, return on investment. So, where there is less ROI, you do not focus that much. Resource optimization is always the technique to make use of the necessary or available resources in the necessary functions. So, this is the relevance of resource optimization. And third, we have alignment with organizational goals. Now, by linking learning and development initiatives to strategic objectives, organizations can foster a culture of continuous improvement that supports long-term growth and competitiveness. This is certainly something which I have already discussed when we talked about the strategic intent. We talked about the strategic intent. Specifically, you look into other typical relevance or importance of needs assessment, we see that improved employee engagement is yet another aspect. Employees are more likely to engage with training programs that address their actual needs rather than perceived ones. So, this increases motivation, this increases participation, leading to better outcomes. And finally, we have the presentation of skill gaps. Proactively identifying and addressing skill gaps typically reduces the risk of performance issues, turnover issues, and even missed opportunities for innovation. So, basically, to sum up, needs assessment, if you ask me, provide a data-driven approach to learning and development, ensuring that the efforts are focused, they are efficient, they are aligned with both individual and organizational priorities. Refer back to strategic intent. Now, we move forward with respect to the types of learning and development needs. Let us understand the learning and development needs. These can be categorized into primarily three types. So, each serves its own distinct purpose within the broader context of the organizational aspects. When you talk about the organizational needs, typically these needs focus on aligning training with the strategic objectives and long-term vision of the organization. So, they address issues at a macro level. They address issues at a macro level, maybe improving the productivity could be one aspect. Or maybe enhancing the customer satisfaction could be another aspect, or innovation, fostering innovation could be yet another aspect when you talk about the organizational needs. So, let us take an example. A manufacturing company may identify the need to adopt new technologies to remain competitive, requiring workforce upskilling. Or maybe a case of financial services firm may need to train employees on the compliance regulations to mitigate the legal risk. So, assessment methods can be like strategic planning documents, or what we see as or understand as the SWOT analysis, strengths, weakness, opportunities and threats, or maybe the industry benchmarks. That all are relevant industry trends. So, all these are typically the assessment needs when we talk about the organizational needs. Now, let us come to the second aspect, which is task or operational needs. So, when you look into task or operational needs, these needs pertain to the specific skills and competencies required to perform particular job or functions. So, they are often tied to operational efficiencies or the quality of work. An example could be, let us say, you look into a customer service representative. That representatives, those who may require training in something like conflict resolution techniques to handle difficult clients, or IT professionals who may need certification in cyber security to protect, let us say, sensitive data. So, these typical operational or task needs have certain assessment methods like job descriptions and competency frameworks. competency frameworks typically, which help in analyzing the operational needs, performance matrix, or observation and task analysis. So, these are some of the typical assessment methods that exist within the task and operational needs. And then we finally come to the third and the micro aspect, which is individual needs. These needs, if you ask me, typically focus on personal development areas identified through performance reviews, self-assessments, or even career aspirations. So, they are concerned with enhancing an individual's capabilities to improve the job performance or prepare for future roles. An example could be, let us say, an employee may seek leadership training to prepare for a managerial position, or let us say a team member may need coaching to improve time management skills. So, when we look into this individual needs specifically, the possible assessment methods what I can think of is, let us say, 360-degree feedback, some of the PDPs, personal development plans can be effective, or some self-evaluation tools. Self-evaluation tools can be there, psychometric tests can be there. So, all these typically help in analyzing the individual needs. Now, let us look into the process, the need assessment process. The need assessment process is a systematic approach to diagnosing learning and development needs within an organization. So, if you look into this critically, it involves identifying the performance gaps, identifying the performance gaps, analyzing the root causes, prioritizing the needs, and even developing tailored solution. So, let us look into the typical identification of performance gaps. How to identify the performance gaps? Let us start with what are performance gaps. So, typically how to uncover performance gaps is to identify the performance gaps. Organization use methods to gather data. So, for this data collection and analysis, we have the performance appraisals. Performance appraisals involve evaluating employees against predefined standards or key performance indicators. So, this method provides structured feedback on, let us say, employee strength, employee weakness. Let us take an example. A software development company might evaluate developers based on metrics such as, say, code quality or adherence to deadlines or even collaboration skills for that matter. So, if developers consistently miss deadlines, it indicates a potential gap in time management or maybe technical expertise. Second possibility with respect to data collection and analysis is observation. Directly observing the candidates. Directly observing the candidates or the employees in the work environment allows for real-time insights into how the tasks are performed. So, observation helps uncover inefficiencies or deviations from the standard operating procedures. An example could be, let us say, a manufacturing supervisor notices that works take longer than expected to operate machinery. So, upon closer observation, they realize the issue stems from outdated equipment manuals which are difficult to follow. Another significant way to identify and gather data is surveys and questionnaires. Surveys and questionnaires collect feedback from employees, managers, and even customers to a great extent, and they provide valuable qualitative and quantitative data about perceived challenges and areas for improvement. Let us take an example to understand this. In the retail scenario mentioned earlier, surveys reveal that employees feel unprepared to answer customer queries about new products due to insufficient training. Many a time we would have observed this in our day-to-day life. So, this directly correlates with declining customer satisfaction score. So, if you ask me why identifying performance gap matters, the answer is simple. Identifying performance gaps is critical because it sets the foundation for targeted interventions. Without understanding where the problems lie, organizations risk wasting resources on irrelevant or ineffective training programs. Now, the second step would be to analyze the causes of gaps. When you look into this aspect, you have to first understand the root causes. Once performance gaps are identified, typically the next step is to analyze these root causes. Some may be surface level symptoms, that is, let's say poor sales figures. They may have deeper underlying issues that need addressing. So, some of the typical common categories of causes would be, the lack of knowledge or skills. Employees may not possess the necessary KSAs, if you recollect, knowledge, skills and abilities to perform effectively. Let's say a new hire struggles to use a CRM system because they were not adequately trained during the onboarding process, or there might be some inadequate tools or resources, and external factors like outdated technology or insufficient materials can impede performance. Or somebody like, let's say an example, call center agents cannot resolve customer issues efficiently because their computers frequently crash. So, this is an inadequate tool or resource constraint. That would be a cause. Another aspect would be the poor management practices. When you look into leadership failures, you look into unclear expectations or lack of support contribute to underperformance. So, team members fail to meet project deadlines because their manager does not communicate priorities very clearly. So, you look into the typical aspects of analyzing the causes of gaps. Please understand there are these 5 whys technique. You must have come across them, repeatedly asking why until the root cause is covered. Let's say, as an example, why did the customer complaints increase? That's a contention we are having, or that's a doubt we are having. Because employees lack product knowledge, or why did they lack product knowledge? Again we probe, because no training was provided. Then we go for why no training was provided. Like that, 5 whys technique. There could be also this fishbone diagram, which many of you might already know. We also call them the Ishikawa charts. We call them the Ishikawa charts, visual representations that categorize the potential causes into branches. It could be people, process or tools. So, a fishbone diagram typically for declining productivity might highlight factors such as, say, workload, or maybe training deficiencies, or workplace distractions as the typical causes. So, that was an example for the Ishikawa chart. Now, let us look into the third step, which is prioritizing the learning needs. When you talk about prioritization, why prioritization is necessary? Organizations often face multiple competing demands for limited resources. So, not all identified needs require immediate action. Some may have a higher impact on business outcomes than others. Prioritization ensures that efforts are focused on high value initiatives. So, if you look into how to prioritize the learning needs, several frameworks and tools can typically guide the prioritization. Let's understand this with the help of first one, which is impact versus effort matrix. So, this matrix plots learning needs based on 2 dimensions. One is typically impact and another is effort. Impact is how significantly will addressing the need improve performance or achieve organizational goals, and effort will be what resources, let's say time, money or personnel that are required to address the need. A classic example would be training employees on cybersecurity protocols might score high on both impact because they are preventing costly breaches, and they may also score high on effort requiring specialized trainers. So, basically this is a impact versus effort matrix. Second is what we have already seen. We tried to introduce a different aspect altogether here of the Kirkpatrick model developed by Donald Kirkpatrick. We have already seen this model evaluates training effectiveness across 4 levels. So, if you look into the reaction, let me ask a question. Did participants find the training engaging and relevant? When you come to learning, did participants acquire the intended knowledge or skills? When you come to behavior, did participants apply what they learned on the particular job? And when you come to results, I can always ask, did the training lead to measurable improvements in business outcomes? Another significant aspect when you talk about the prioritizing of learning needs is the strategic alignment. Ladies and gentlemen, please note, when you're talking about this alignment, we had a great discussion on strategic intent. Prioritizing needs that align closely with strategic objectives is always the way to go about. For instance, let's say if the company aims to expand into international markets, language training for employees becomes a priority. Now let's look into the fourth step, which is to develop solutions. You are looking into developing solutions. You see, you have to look for designing tailored interventions. Now, after prioritizing the learning needs, the final step is this: effective interventions, typically if you look into, should be tailored to address the specific gaps while considering learner preferences and organizational constraints. So when you look into the solutions, some of the typical solutions might be workshop and classroom training, or maybe sometimes e-learning modules. When you look into workshop and classroom training, it's ideal for hands-on skill development. Conducting a workshop on advanced Excel techniques for finance teams can be an example. You look into the e-learning modules, what we are also doing right now. The e-learning modules typically suitable for flexible, self-paced learning. Online courses for remote employees like this might be a typical aspect, and when it comes to some compliance regulations, nothing like that. Then you have the mentoring and coaching aspects, which provides personalized guidance, pairing, let's say, junior engineers with experienced mentors to enhance the technical expertise could be one way to look into that. Sometimes there might be job aids and checklists. It simplifies complex tasks through easy to follow instructions, developing a troubleshooting guide for IT technicians. So typically we are looking into something of a smart approach. Specific, clearly define what is the typical objective. Train employees on using the new CRM system. If that is the objective, go with that. Measurable, you look into establishing metrics to track the progress. A typical example could be, let's say, achieving 90% of the success or say performance improvement or proficiency within 3 months. Third could be achievable. Ensure that the solution is realistic given available resources. It could be relevant, align with the organizational goals and learner needs. And finally, time bound. You look into setting deadlines for completion. Let's say some example could be launching the training program by Q2. So that might be another significant aspect when you try to develop solutions. And finally, implementation considerations. You might have a pilot testing before full scale rollout. Test the solution with a small group to identify the potential issues that can come up. Feedback loops can be there, which can be continuously gathered. Evaluation metrics, which define success indicators upfront to measure the effectiveness of the intervention. So all these typical aspects covers the solution aspect of L&D, learning and development. Now let's look into one of the most critical aspects of today's discussion, which is the tools and techniques for diagnosing the needs. To effectively diagnose, ladies and gentlemen, learning and development needs, organizations must utilize a variety of tools and techniques. These methods provide valuable insights into the current state of performance and help identify areas for improvement. Let's say one would be typically the SWOT analysis. Strengths, weakness, opportunity, threats. We all know it. But do we know it as a strategic planning tool? The moment strategy comes in, it is long term. So do we understand this as a strategic planning tool used to evaluate internal and external factors that influence an organization's or individual's ability to achieve its goal? So you look into the strength, weakness, opportunities. Strength could be, let's take an example and understand this. That would be the right way. A team excels in customer service but struggles with technical troubleshooting. So we know what the strength is. Employees lack proficiency in using new software tools. we know what the weakness is. We look into the organization that plans to adopt AI driven tools, creating a need for upskilling. That would be opportunity. Or maybe competitors are adopting advanced technologies faster than your organization, a classic case of threat. So please do understand that this is having a potential for being a strategic planning tool. Now let's come to focus groups. Very quickly, most of you might know, but what are focus groups? Some of you might not know it, and my intention is to take the class all along. So focus groups involve bringing together small groups of employees, let's say typically 6 to 10 participants, to discuss specific topics related to their work environment. So moderators guide the discussion to uncover the qualitative insights about perceived challenges, opportunities and training needs. And if you ask me why use focus groups generate a rich, detailed feedback that surveys alone cannot capture. So they allow the participants to express opinions freely, explore complex issues collaboratively and build consensus on shared concerns. So when you are looking into focus groups, they are critical in getting more data. Then you have competency mapping. Competency mapping, the first question, what is competency mapping? The competency mapping involves identifying the skills, behaviors and attributes required for each role in organization. So it's not with respect to only one particular organization, it is each role within an organization. So once these competencies are defined, they are compared against employees' current capabilities, which will give us what we know as the gaps, or what we were discussing as the gaps. So typically you are looking into the gaps or identifying the gaps. So by clearly outlining the knowledge, skills and abilities needed for success, competency mapping ensures alignment is there between individual performance and organizational objectives. So it also serves as a foundation for designing role specific training programs. If you are not aware of this competency mapping, I will quickly tell the steps. One is to define the core competencies. For a sales representative, let me take an example to make you understand this. For a sales representative, competencies might include, let's say, negotiation skills, product knowledge, relationship management. Second step would be to assess the current capabilities. You look into evaluating employees' existing competencies through interviews, tests or self-assessment. Third could be identifying the gaps. You look into highlighting the discrepancies between required and actual competencies. A typical example could be maybe sales reps may excel in relationship management but lack negotiation skills. So that is a clearly identified gap. Then finally, as a fourth aspect, you develop action plans. Typically designing interventions to address identified gaps. So what are the benefits? It ensures clarity around role expectations, it facilitates personalized development plans, it aligns training initiatives with business goals. And finally, we move to the data analytics, one of the hot aspects when we consider today's world. What is data analytics? We all know. Quickly, it involves analyzing large data sets to uncover patterns, trends and correlations. In the context of learning and development, typically data analytics helps identify systemic issues and predict future needs based on the historical performance metrics. So if you look into the types of data used in diagnosing needs, it could be something which we have already seen, the performance metrics. So typically this performance metrics track KPIs such as sales figure, productivity rates or maybe error percentages. So let's take an example, declining sales figures now among new hires suggest inadequate onboarding training. Another significant tool might be engagement surveys. Engagement surveys analyze employee satisfaction and engagement levels. So, something like how typically low engagement scores in a department indicate potential morale or let us say leadership issues for that case. And then turnover rates, monitor retention data to identify the turnover hotspots. So, high attrition in entry level positions might be possible points for dissatisfaction with initial training experience. So, when we typically look into today's discussion altogether, what we understand here is that there are certain knowledge, skills and abilities available with each individual within the organization, no doubt about it. The job or the role that you are doing or executing will also have certain requirements of task, duties and responsibilities. The mismatch is the gap. Once you identify the gap, we tend to understand what are the different tools and techniques to mitigate those gaps. So, when you look into learning and development, how can I say that my organization is lacking in learning and development is through this need analysis. Now, when we understand that the organization is lacking, that is the only point in time where we can actually make some intervention and mitigate any deficiencies, any problems, any lacunae. So, that is what the need analysis in learning and development is all about. I hope you would have understood this comprehensive discussion with respect to today's session. See you with more details of learning and development in the next class. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.